Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you for your presentation today. It's been very helpful and the questions that you've answered. If I could come to you first, Inspector Preston. You spoke in your introduction about the fact that you have 3 First Nations territories that you work upon. And I'm just wondering if you could talk about, in your experience, what are some of the hurdles or concerns you have when enforcing the various statutes, regulations, as well as bylaws and laws in First Nations communities? And can you also add that context of how do you deal with 3 different communities and the challenges that that might present?
Thank you for the question. As I've stated, in each contract province that the RCMP is the police of jurisdiction, there's over 100 statutes and regulations that we're expected to enforce. Unfortunately, not all of those regulations or statutes are applicable on reserve. I'll give an example here in British Columbia, the BC Motor Vehicle Act, pretty standard act, is not applicable on all roads within reserve. So for example, one of the communities here, on one of the roads going into the community, the Motor Vehicle Act applies. But as soon as you turn off onto a different road, still on the same reserve, it doesn't apply. So it becomes very difficult. I mean, the officers this is what we do for a living, so we get to know where we can and cannot apply the law, but it becomes very difficult to explain to the general public. And it builds mistrust when a member of the community calls and says, hey, so-and-so is driving, they know they're not supposed to be. And we say, well, actually, that doesn't apply on that road. Please call us when they actually go over to a different road. Like I say, it's very difficult to explain to the general public and becomes, leads to mistrust and a loss of community confidence in their law enforcement. With regard to banned bylaws, it becomes even more difficult because of all the things we've talked about already about the what it takes to enact the law itself, for the chief and council to actually come up with the law, because they have to work with lawyers. It costs be very expensive. And then it becomes the enforcement. Who will enforce it? And if we do enforce it, what mechanism do we have in place for a dispute? So if someone disputes the fact that they were breaking the bylaw, who is going to hear that? Who's going to be the prosecutor? Who's going to be the judge? It all becomes very complicated, and a lot of times communities just do not have the capacity to roll with that.
Thank you. And I guess this is part of my frustration. I keep hearing this part about relationship, and I really respect the work that so many people, so many RCMP are doing to do that outreach. But I've also heard from the communities that I represent that they'll have somebody in place that they really trust, they really feel comfortable with. I think Mr. Vidal talked about that with Staff Sergeant Howe, and when they leave, it really breaks apart that core relationship. And so it's always this job of rebuilding. So I'm not sure if you have a solution to that, but I'm just wondering about how is their development in the RCMP about how to build these relationships? Is there systems actually coming into place to work on that?
I don't know if Staff Sergeant Howe wants to touch base, but I can quickly speak. We do have some training, but one of the biggest thing is, like I said, those individual relationships. And the hope is that, yes, we do transfer around. That's just the nature of our work, that the trust is there, that if I leave and I'm a trusted member, the next person coming in can build upon that relationship, and they're not starting at ground zero. When you have a breakdown in that relationship, like we've had in the past, due to the enforcement of unpopular or unjust laws like the residential schools, it takes a long time to start building up those relationships. And we hope that people start to see past the uniform and see the individual that's wearing the uniform, and know that they can trust that person and not rely or dwell on the fact that a uniform may have had a bad experience with that uniform in the past. But with regard to how do we fix transferring around, I don't have an answer for that.
So can you tell me about a time that you worked with a First Nation community to implement an Indian Act bylaw, and how easy was it, and was it successful?
So I've been policing now. Thank you for the question. But I've been policing now for 25 years, and in every one of the detachments that I've served, I've had the privilege of working with First Nation communities, both treated and non-treated. This has afforded me the opportunity to work with First Nations on enacting Indian Act bylaws. I'd like to say it's been an enjoyable procedure, but it has not. It's been fraught with a lot of issues. As an example, I worked with a First Nation community here on the West Coast with an intoxicant bylaw. The community has been long suffering from alcoholism, and they wanted to rid the community of alcohol. And sitting down, it was a 3-year. I was there for 3 years. It took over 3 years to just get it to the point where they could vote on it. Some of the pitfalls were not have the community did not have the legal expertise to draft the bylaw, so they ended up having to utilize outside legal services, which were very expensive for a community that did not have a lot of money. And then from that point forward, they also didn't have the capacity to have the dispute mechanism in place. So at the end of the day, even though the law was passed, it becomes somewhat unenforceable, because for the police to enforce it, we have to have a mechanism for someone to dispute. And when it isn't there, it falls apart. And they did not have the support, I guess, of public prosecutions to prosecute that bylaw.